I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Thursday, June 13th. We're heading towards Juneteenth, a celebration of freedom, independence for our people here, and I'm discovering around the world. People are acknowledging the importance, the historicity of that event. And I happen to have been listening to a podcast a couple of days ago about a community in a place called Nacimiento, Mexico. It's a Black town in Mexico. The residents of Nacimiento are descendants of people who were uh, enslaved Africans who had been liberated or liberated themselves by connecting with the Seminole Indians in Florida. And when the Trail of Tears happened, in the 1800s, they removed Indian populations from the south to Oklahoma. The Black Seminoles were among them. When they got to Oklahoma, groups of them left Oklahoma and went into Mexico, where they received even more shelter, more openness, more opportunity, and more resistance to the slave policies of the North of the United States, of their North, of North America. And so that community still exists, and that community has a celebration every year, June 19th, Juneteenth, celebrating freedom for Black people and recognizing, the terrible cost of enslavement, but the price we paid to seek and attain freedom. Well, Juneteenth is on my mind, and on, I think, the minds of many people. If you are thinking about Juneteenth, we'd love to have your comments. You can do that by dropping a note in the comment section. Actually, shout out yourself, shout out where you are and what the things are of concern to you. Ideas you want us to kick around and discuss here at the Conversation with Al McFarlane. We're glad to. We'd love to have you on the program as well. If you're interested in being a part of our discussion down the road, just drop us a note to scheduling at insightnews.com or scheduling the conversation at insightnews.com, and we'll reach out to you and get you involved. Today, we've got a great program as always, and one of the things coming up in a few days is the annual meeting of the Black Press of America, the National Newspaper Publishers Association. And I'm pleased to have with me right now Stacy Brown, who is the editor and leader of the Newswire news service for Black Press USA. And Stacy, I wanted you to, first of all, welcome you to the program. Thank you. So if you don't know, it's the Black Press USA that hosts the Conversations with Al McFarlane program on the Black Press USA YouTube channel. And so we are grateful for the relationship. They inspire and support us in reaching you through StreamYard and across other social media platforms. Stacy is one of the architects of keeping the Black press viable, moving into the technology of the future and keeping us present locally and around the world, making the global local, as we say, and the local global. Stacy, good to see you, my friend.
Well,
Welcome to
it's
the
good.
conversation.
It's always good to see you, Al. But let me just say this: don't you gave me a promotion, not the editor. That's Norman Rich, but I am the senior national correspondent, and I do host our morning show. So
Okay. Well, you're
I
part
don't,
of
I don't mind. I don't mind.
Yeah, well, you're part of a great team. I know that, and we thank you for you and Norman and the whole team at NNP. Hopefully, we'll be joined by the new, not new, but the current chair of NNPA, who will be with you and others convening the national convention next week. We'll talk about that as well. But before we finish today's program, I'm going to bring in a couple more people. Not right now, but get them ready. Corey Day is here in Minnesota. He's the head of an organization called Blue Ox Strategies, and it's a consulting firm that does political work here in Minnesota. And he comes to that after having headed the Minnesota Democratic Farmer Labor Party, called the DFL. He was the executive director of Minnesota DFL for maybe half a dozen years or more. He'll tell us that. And also here is going to be my friend Anika Robbins, who is a fierce advocate, organizer, entrepreneur, communicator. And they both are going to join me and you in talking about what we need to do to secure wins for our people come November 2024. Before we do that, Stacy, we just have you talk about some of the key issues that Black people are dealing with across the country, across the world, as you are presenting daily at the NNPA program, and promote the program.
Well, it's called Let It Be Known. Every weekday morning, 7:30 a.m. Eastern time. But obviously, it lives on YouTube, lives on the Let It Be Known YouTube page, and Black Press USA's Facebook page, and YouTube as well, Twitter, etc. But one of the big things, I mean, we can really put it in a nutshell. You talk about November, you talk about the issues, the most overlooked but biggest thing that's going on as it pertains to November is this Project 2025. I'm not sure how much you talked about it, Al. I'm sure it has come across your purview. We saw Representative Jasmine Crockett really grill one of the writers of Project 2025. But what it is in a nutshell, it's an authoritarian racist manifesto that if Trump is reelected, then we are going to essentially be taken back to a time where many of us like to forget, where they want to take those type of things out of history books. And I'm talking about Jim Crow and beyond. The laws that they plan to establish, and we see some of that now, taking autonomy away from women, bodily autonomy, these attacks against DE&I, banning the books by Black authors and people of color, and affirmative action. So we see that in play, but it gets worse. You might recall Donald Trump did say, hey, on day one, I'll be a dictator on day one. Project 2025 lays out an entire dictatorship. It lays out that where if we say, a lot of things we tend to say, oh, they can't do this and they can't do that, but we've been watching it unfold and they've been able to do it. The way they have it set up, and the way they will set it up, if you're a government employee, for instance, you have to pledge allegiance to Trump. Rings a bell, right? Hitler. It says that if you challenge him politically, you can be arrested in jail, which means that when you break it all down, the man has no intentions on leaving office again. And people, again, are in the habit of saying, you can't do that. Well, they continue to show otherwise. And this particular administration, the Trump administration, is going to show you better than they can tell you if you allow him back in office. Project 2025 is going to decimate communities everywhere, but particularly communities of color. Take away any funding for highways and roadways, any social program, including Social Security, including Medicaid and Medicare. It is going to really be devastating for most Americans, but particularly those of color.
To what end, Stacy Brown? What's the end game? What's the objective of that strategy, that thinking? And so, what you're telling me and us is that this is not a series of one-of isolated incidences, but a coordinated strategy to overhaul existence itself as we know it. What is the end game from your point of view? How do we describe this so that we're crystal clear on what the stakes are for our people and for democracy?
Yeah, so the stakes, the end game. The end game is and I hope that audio is a little bit better. Can you hear me, Al?
Yeah, it is. It's better. Yeah, it was okay, but it's better now. Thank you.
Okay, great. But the end game is as simple as this: 76 million people voted for Donald Trump in 2020. 76 million, second most in history. Of course, Joe Biden got the most in history, 81 million votes. Many of those 76 million were folks that were in the shadows for years.
folks that was afraid to publicly put on their white sheets again, folks that were publicly afraid to use the N word, to say what really was on their minds, on their racist minds.
Hmm.
And now this is not everybody, but the end game is to, as he said himself, Trump said that there are, and this is Donald Trump speaking, there are more um, racism against white people in this country than ever against black people. I mean, the audacity, but to show you where he's going. So we see the if you've been following the Fearless Fund situation down in Atlanta,
Hmm.
where this was an organization set up to give grants to black women-owned small businesses. Well, they've come in and said, "Hey, that's that's racism. That's a form of discrimination." And so far, the not only did the local court, but the appellate courts have upheld that. And if this goes to this extreme MAGA 6-3 Supreme Court that we have,
Hmm.
it's going to be upheld there. So they want to take away programs. So if I say Al McFarlane, I'm going to give Al McFarlane an Insight News, a black owned business. If I'm going to give him $1 million, well, somebody else can step in and say that's discriminatory. And
Hmm.
so these grants that some of us are seeing, and let's face it, some of our publishers in the black press do get grants.
Hmm.
Those are going to be out the window.
Hmm.
Small businesses, big businesses, or whatever size businesses you might have. This is the end game: is to take away education. What happened during slavery? They didn't allow the slaves to read. They didn't allow them to learn. They want to. You see that the writing's been on the wall, and in Project 2025, I urge people to read it, particularly if you intend to vote, because you want to be informed. But Project 2025 says we're we're gonna gut education. There will be no more Department of Education. This is not hyperbole. This is not editorializing. This is exactly what's in Project 2025. So, we're banning books. You can't, you can't read about so-called Black history, because Black history obviously is American history. Let's face it. Let's put that aside. But
Hmm.
but this is what they are doing. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg, though. It's really the part of the foundation of what Donald Trump and his supporters plan to do. Again, tax the poor. That was his plan, and he did that in his first term, and gave all of these tax breaks to the multimillionaires. And there are even more tax breaks coming to the multimillionaires under a Trump administration, and more heartache for those, even those who are making in six figures. You're talking 100 to 200, 300, $400,000. There are some heartaches on the way under their plan.
They might be poor at some point in time, or
Oh,
considered poor
exactly.
in a relative
Exactly.
sense. So let me ask you, we talked about end game again. I'd love to hear somebody sort of spell out the apocalyptic reality possibility, because it may be slavery by another name, but slavery nonetheless. And if it's a question of disenfranchising millions of people, particularly African American people
Mhm.
and people of color, that's what it seems to me would be the uh, uh, statement being made by the supremacist thought that
Yes.
is representing and represented by Donald Trump. And as you were saying, Stacy, will people accept this? Well, they're accepting it incrementally, county by county,
Yep.
local school boards, library boards, public utilities commissions. They're intentionally inserting their operatives in local elections, and that's the cadre, the fifth column, if you will, that
Yep.
is infiltrating or emerging. It's always been there, but it's emerging again because to
Right.
some degree it was pushed back, defeated to a limited degree by the emergence of the civil rights movement, voting rights, economic opportunity for Black people. Let me bring in a couple of people here locally just to respond to this, and we'll come back to more headlines that you're dealing with at the Black Press of America. Corey Day, and Anika Robbins, if you're both there, come on in the conversation and give me your impressions. Corey, you first. Welcome to the program. Good to see you again. And this is a dismal picture that is being painted. Anika, same thing. You're active, boots on the ground, organizing people through the Anika Foundation, encouraging and demanding that our people show up and show out at the polls. But when you hear this conversation, what are you thinking? Corey, you first, and then Anika.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I always love to have these conversations on the show. I think what Mr. Brown is saying is exactly right. I think right now this Trump campaign is laying the groundwork to streamline every form of government, bringing white nationalists into the White House. They're not hiding this. They're saying it out loud. They're putting it in documents. They have the Heritage Foundation, who's funding the 2025 project. They're putting it all on paper here. They're making it as clear as day to us that this is the kind of government we want, a government that gets rid of immigration, no longer deals with climate change, no longer looks at the African American and other communities of color as a value to this country. I just think it's one of those things that we as Black folks and as Democrats and other folks who are dealing with this need to find a way to be very clear and concise as we talk about this, because the other side isn't hiding where they're at. And right now, for whatever reason, we don't have a very clear vision of understanding that what a Trump presidency is going to mean to this country, to our democracy, and what it means to be Black people in this country.
Anika, what are your thoughts? Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you, Al. Same to all the guests on the show. It's always a pleasure to be here. I think it's spot on. I think that what is worrying to me is the complacency. That's the flip side of it, right? The complacency, and the privilege of being in a place of being complacent when all of our rights are basically being threatened. I think it's also concerning that the large numbers allegedly of Black men who are, changing saddles, so to speak. So I think it's really important for people to get reacclimated or reacquainted with what's really at stake. We can't afford that. And what's alarming to us as well is that in the last primary, 40% voted uncommitted. And so, and then the previous election, about 30% of that vote is what gave us a Trump presidency. And so I think there are a lot of things that in the Black community, we really have to come to Jesus with what the realities are and make a commitment. We don't have the luxury to sit it out or remain undecided, uncommitted. We really have to make concrete decisions. One of our mantras is that voting is one of the most underutilized power tools at our disposal. And so many are leaving it, especially those who are veteran voters, people who know better, who are educated, have been voting. A lot of these folks are despondent and apprehensive. And this is really not the time to be that way. We lead a nonpartisan effort, Black Votes Matter Minnesota, and we do a rigorous grassroots voter education program. And it's because we find that folks that you feel should know better, they don't. They don't know what the cycles are. They don't really know what's going on. And we deliver these messages in a way that, it maintains dignity and whatnot, but we have to make informed decisions. And I also want to point out the fact that we hear a lot of people talking about whether they're voting or not voting for a particular candidate because of where they stand on a particular issue. You can't vote for someone based on just a singular issue. This is like a wholesale, what is this person embody? What are their values? What has been their record towards our communities, towards our families? As Mr. Brown had mentioned, we're talking about infrastructure. women's rights. You mentioned the Fearless Fund. So now we are not,
Mhm.
white communities have been in a position to support themselves for centuries, right? For millennia. And so now we have a group of Black women who have come together to create a fund to support other Black women. And now that's discrimination. Are you kidding me? So there's a lot at stake here. And we can't pussyfoot around these things. And a lot of how we're tailoring our message is just that, like brass tacks. And this is where we're standing on the precipice of what we don't know. And we will find out come November 6th or 10th, because who's to say there won't be shenanigans, again, So I think there's an element of fear in the country too
Mhm.
right now. People are on edge. We've been on edge since last year, knowing that 2024 was coming up.
Mhm.
So our message is going to be hard and harsh, driving straightforward. People will have to make a decision. This is absolutely not the cycle or the season to sit out.
Well, understand this too, if we don't mind jumping real quick, that again, all the things that we were talking about with Project 2025 is not hyperbole, is not our spin, is not anything like that. But understand this too, that if Donald Trump wins, um, there will be no more elections. There will
Hmm.
be no more elections.
Hmm.
So think about that.
Yeah.
And again, don't when folks say they can't do this, they can't, they have, and they will, and they will be in a better position to do those things. And Anika mentioned things about Black men, and part of the problem what you have there, Al and Corey, you have these very high profile Black men who have come out in favor of and in support of whom they refer to, which really sticks in the crow at times, Uncle Trump. You have the Ice Cubes of the world, the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, the Don Kings, the Snoop Dogs, Mike Tyson, Lil Wayne. And naturally, you got the Clarence Thomases and the Byron Donalds of the world, whom I say who I consider just people wearing blackface. But that's just me. But these folks believe, Jay-Z's of the world, they believe that their wealth and their fame they'll be able to come through a Trump administration unscathed. No one's going through a Trump administration unscathed, particularly if you are a person of color.
Let me lay a scenario out that sort of brings another point to the conversation. 4 years ago, George Floyd here in Minnesota, an event, the murder of George Floyd, an event that we witnessed here and around the world due to the bravery of a child who had her cell phone and refused to step away and to step back and to step down when she was ordered to by a cadre of uniformed representatives of the government, policemen, as they murdered a human being. And you had the world, in a sense, and particularly this town in our country, aflame with anger and with indignation and with a call for re-envisioning what the proper role of law enforcement is. What about health? What about mental health? What about healing? What about all the things that lead to the conditions that cause people to function outside of the realm of expectation in a community? But all that came to light in a major way, and people were surprised and happy when, led by Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, Derek Chauvin was convicted and sentenced, as were his colleagues, three other officers involved in the arrest and murder of George Floyd. Now, in the past couple of weeks, Hennepin County prosecutor dropped the charges against an officer of the Minnesota State Patrol. His name was Officer Londrigan, and that in light of what she said was not having sufficient evidence to win a conviction in a trial, Londrigan accused of killing Ricky Scott II in another traffic stop where they alleged they were afraid he was afraid that his partner was going to be hurt or shot, so he shot and killed Ricky Scott. But the legal team representing Londrigan came out blasting the heck out of the county prosecutor, blasting the governor, blasting anybody and everybody, saying that this open season on law enforcement must end. And so now there's this groundswell of support, as I read it, by ordinary people, and I read that to mean white people, saying that we've gone too far in reacting to George Floyd, and let's turn back the hands of time. That's connected to the incident where, I forgot which district it is, but a school district that took down Confederate names on school buildings last week. The board decided to reinstate the Confederate names as
Virginia.
heroic names. And so that's a shift back. It's a pendulum swinging between fast. So where we are now is in a place where that side that felt it was in danger of being marginalized is really vociferous. And on some of these shows, Stacy Brown, people have said what they understand and hear from the right, from the MAGA, is an armed, what's the right word for it? Resistance to change, or a willingness to take arms against what they feel was an encroachment on white privilege.
Oh, consider
Go ahead,
Al.
Stacey. Yeah.
Yeah, but consider what you're saying. Think about the gun laws that have changed as well. Think about how in places like Louisiana and Texas and several other jurisdictions, now an 18-year-old can conceal carry without a permit, without a license. There is a method behind all of that madness. They are prepping for something major. You've heard the twice impeached, the 34 times felon, former president, presumptive GOP nominee, call for such action if by chance he loses in November. So this call to arms, while this is why I continue to say stuff is not hyperbole or we're making things up or we're exaggerating. This is what they are doing. They are preparing for both sides. They're preparing for both outcomes. Him winning, right? So with him winning, you have Project 2025. With him potentially losing, you have everybody armed and everybody incensed racially.
So two things. One, if they win, roll back the clock, do it by under the cover of the law of the victory. But if they lose, they want to discredit the entire apparatus, and this would be the new civil war. And they are talking civil war talk. They are saying that if they lose, they don't accept the results of that loss, and they are asking themselves, are they prepared to? And they're telling themselves they are prepared to bear arms. They believe that's their duty, that's their right, that's their mythology that they're drumming up and ginning up. But it, in a sense, ultimately leads to them being willing to put on the hoods again, or not, just put on the uniform, or not, but just go out and with their Second Amendment rights, be prepared to kill the enemy. And unfortunately, sisters and brothers, we know what that has meant in the past. It's us. Bobby Henry is here. Bobby Henry is the chairman of the Black Press of America, the National Newspaper Publishers Association. Brother Bobby, good to see you. Thank you and welcome to the program. Two things. One, jump in this conversation. It's an important one. You wrote a piece that was published in Black Papers across the country. A couple of weeks ago, we published it in Insight News here, challenging and encouraging our people to understand what's at stake. First of all, welcome. Good to see you, my friend.
Mr. McFarlane, thank you so very much. It's good to be here.
And please call me Al. Al.
Okay, Al. I'll do it. I don't want to make you feel old.
And you just did it, but thank you. Okay.
No, we're the same age.
That's
right.
But
thank you so very much. I was listening to the conversation, but what is encouraging to me is to know that there are other liberating freedom fighters out here. And I commend and appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot afford to not speak up and tell the truth for what it is. Yeah, I agree with you 100%, Al. We are on the verge of what is or could be a civil war. And so we need to be ready. I do believe one of the things we should have in our arsenal is understanding the power of voting, the total surrounding what it means to vote, all aspects. And the other thing is we cannot be afraid to speak truth to power. We can't be afraid to tell the truth for what it is. I heard the brother say earlier, Corey, when he and I got disconnected. But I agree with you, Corey. We got to speak up and not be afraid. I don't care where we are or who we are confronted with. We have to. And Stacy, you know it. You do it every morning, every day. You know, and it's so good to hear the sister Robbins speak as well. And so I do believe that if we don't confront those who oppose our freedoms, all of them, black, white, gay, lesbian, whatever, if we are afraid to speak up to them, then we are giving our freedom and our lives away. We're not fighting, we're just turning it over to them. And I also believe that in order for us to engage in this war, it's going to take all of us with the like-mindedness that is, I don't want to sound cliche, but freedom for all. And we're fighting for it. So that's where I'll jump in at.
Summarize the editorial that you wrote a couple weeks ago. What were the principal points that you delivered?
Man, I have to pull that up. Al, you know how it is when you're writing.
You're in the moment. You're in the flow. Pull it up when you get a minute.
I was caught up. I was caught up. I'm glad that others were able to hone in on what was happening right then. I wrote another one too, but we are. Oh, sorry, I can find it.
Well, don't worry about it. If it comes up, that's fine. Maybe Stacy can find it and put it up in the share. But let me ask you. You've got the National Convention. The Black Press of America has its annual summer meeting coming up. Tell people about that and tell people what's on the agenda, where you're going to be, what's on the agenda, and the question I framed at the beginning of the program, Bobby Henry, was. What do we do to safeguard our wins and to grow our wins in this environment? And I'm saying two things here. One is that we have to be mindful of the dangers, the trepidation that lies ahead, because from the Republican side, if they win, they're going to do what they can do as aggressively and as expansively as they can under the cloak of being official American business, making America great again. If they lose, they take to the streets armed, and they're suggesting create a civil war at which everybody loses, but we are particularly vulnerable in that capacity. We haven't had a discussion in our community that I know of what do we do when they come with guns. That's one discussion. What are we going to do about that? And does that make us a believer? Because right now, many of us are saying, oh, it can't happen. It just can't happen because this is America and because there's a lot of good white people that won't let it happen. But I think at some point in time, it just makes sense to have the discussion. What do we do when they come knocking and they feel like they're on a mission to cleanse the country and they see us as the item that needs to be cleansed to save what they view as a country? Go ahead.
Wow, Al, you just brought up a whole, as they said in WWF, a whole can of butt whoop.
Yeah.
And so when we talk in that vein, now I need people to understand me. I'm not a proponent of violence. All right. But when it comes to me, the whole story changes. I'm not a proponent of violence. I want to say that. And I do understand when it comes to guns, Now, if I'm not mistaken, I think that there's probably an equal amount of guns distributed throughout this country, which is in itself can present itself as a problem. Guns in the wrong hands. Now, I don't want it to come to that, but I'd be doggone if I'm not going to be prepared if that time should come. In terms of, I want to back up a little bit. In terms of the convention in Baltimore, Stacy, you have the capabilities better than I can right now. Can you screenshot the flyer that's happening in Baltimore? First of all, we're going to one of the blackest cities in the country, and that is Baltimore. And black is beautiful, so there's a lot of stuff there. Baltimore has a lot of black power, and we're bringing some. Now, I must say this: even though the president and the vice president have been invited, I don't know if that is solidified. I do know that if they don't come, it really tells us the condition that we are really in as black people.
Oh, but Bobby, let me jump in just quickly, Mr. Chair. I direct folks back to and Greer and I did this on the morning show as well. We had two distinguished publishers on recently, Mr. Bob Bogle of the Philadelphia Tribune and Sonny Messiah Giles of the Defender Network. And the reason we had them on, because in 1992, Bobby, the NMPA held its convention in Baltimore as well.
I was there.
And Bill Clinton was running for president. And Bill Clinton had committed to coming to speak to the black publishers and the black press at that convention. He last minute didn't, well, he reneged. And Bob Bogle and Sonny Messiah Giles led a press conference. And Greer and I commented that it sounded a whole lot like 2024 Bobby Henry. That press conference was where they really spoke truth to power, as Bobby said. They spoke their minds. They let Clinton know that he was treading down some really, really shaky paths by not keeping his commitment to the black press. And long story short, Clinton did host a meeting with the black press in a public forum to make up for that when he realized the heat that he was getting from the folks of with the likes of Bob Bogle and Sonny Messiah Giles and others in the NMPA. So that being said, as Bobby mentioned, President Biden, Vice President Harris have received, I'm in constant contact with the White House. I'm there a lot. They have formally received written invitations from both the chair, Bobby Henry, and the president, Dr. Ben Chavis, as far back as March. So this has been floating in the Oval Office for a couple of months now. I've had dialogue with the director of Black Media as well as others at the White House. And the last that we've heard is that they are still working on it. It's a difficult thing because he has that debate a week later. But my position on that is, I know he'll be preparing for the debate. However, he's doing other things.
That's
And
right.
other things can and should include that trip from Washington, D.C., that very short trip to Baltimore, Maryland, to personally address the black press. So we'll see what happens. And and if it does not happen, and I know I'm not putting them on the spot, but if folks feel like I'm putting Bobby on the spot, I'm going to put him on the spot.
That's right.
Then he needs to. Bob Bogle was the president at the time. It wasn't called chairman. He was president. He needs to follow what his predecessor did, and I'm sure Bobby would do it. That's why I say I'm not putting him on the spot. But the president would need to be called out because they are telling us they want you, people who look like you, to come out and support them in November. Because
Now
if you don't, they say they're going to lose.
Let's go back, Stacy. Okay. When we were in South Carolina, when we met with Joe Biden, then candidate for president, he had just had a meeting with Clyburn. He was falling behind, way behind in the polls. after meeting with Congressman Clyburn, then the NNPA, the rest is history. So there is a roadmap. There is something that's happening that if it plays the way it should play, perhaps we will create another point of history. And if it does not go that way, then damn, we are in trouble.
Thomas Berry is with us. He is one of the principals in Black Civic Network here in Minnesota, and they're working on a variety of things, but all of them have to do with engagement, equity, leadership, futures for Black people, as described and as pursued by Black people. Thomas Berry, welcome again. Always a pleasure to have you in the conversation. You've been listening for a bit, but when you filter this conversation through the lens of the Black Civic Network, what are the stakes and what are the opportunities from your point of view?
Well, the Black family's at stake, and Black folks got to ask themselves, are you a Toussaint type thinking Black person, or are you a Dessalines type thinking Black person?
What do you mean, Thomas Berry?
You know what I mean? It's the same revolution, but two different ways of thinking. Toussaint wanted to be respected by the white generals, and Dessalines just wanted his freedom. And I think with our situation, we got to ask ourselves as a collective, when we're talking about this political race, what side do we really want to represent? Do we want to be in the room just for the sake of being in the room, or do we want to be in the room and actually get something for our people so that we can do better? We have gotten addicted to showmanship. And so, you know, that's what this White House has done with the Black community. Now, I'm not no fan of the orange president by any means necessary. I think that he should be stopped from being able to get into the Oval Office. I do believe that he does want a civil war. And I always ask this question of conservatives for the past 2 decades: you hate government so much, why do you want to be in government? I've never seen someone say they don't like something and they despise it, but they run to be in it. They run to be in control of it. And so for me, I just look at it from the aspect that the Biden administration needs to come with it. They need to come up with policies that are targeted towards Black men, so you don't have Black men drifting off to want to vote for Trump. Trump only speaks to the lowest vibration of the Black community. And we all should know that. We all should be able to say that.
And what do you mean by that? To break that down.
Well, their idea of him being a felon as a way that he relates to Black folks, that's disrespectful. That's very low vibrational. Him bringing up rappers, and no one, these rappers have to pay $1 million to get free. Like, this isn't done because they're doing it out the kindness of their heart, or they have some affinity for Black folks, or want some type of, upheaval of Black folk to get right. That's not what they do it for. He's getting paid. So it's very low vibrational, and it's really based off of reality TV that a lot of our folks are addicted to. Tubi is the Tubi television network that Black folks watch on the regular, is ran by Fox News. So you got to understand or Fox, I should say. So you should have to understand, if Fox owns Fox News, then just imagine the propaganda that they're feeding to our community. And then you have this president this former president, who is he's a poll chaser. Whatever the polls say is what he does. So he knows how to speak to that low vibration, because they always run in these polls. It may come off as a cultural poll, but they're behind the polls in our community. So they understand how to speak to us. The Biden-Harris administration is a little bit different. They know how to be Black adjacent, but they don't know how to speak to Black folks. Kamala Harris is just not a Black person. We have to own that. She's not African-American, so she just don't relate. And so they need to figure out who they can talk to speak to some of the victories that they've had in their term in the White House, but also speak to us directly and talk about how they can do things that benefit us directly. We're not meant to be cheerleading on the sideline while every other group rise. So I think that it's for them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and get out here and talk to our community if they really want our vote. They need to work for it.
So, Thomas Berry, let me ask you to respond to the apocalyptic scenario that I laid out. What if they decide that, number one, that Biden's win, if he wins in November, is another case of voter fraud, and they decide that they have no choice but to go to the streets with an armed insurrection, that in fact January 6th was practice, but now they are sufficiently organized, mobilizing, and able to replicate that with a better chance of positive, from their point of view, outcomes across the country. that they have shifted the dialogue, the language, the narrative in the country so that sufficient numbers of armed white people believe that they are in immediate and physical, threat for their way of life being ended, and that therefore they have no choice but to answer the call of the bugle and to defend the society. What do we do? What do you do, Thomas Berry, in that scenario?
Well, I would say we wouldn't do what we did when things was happening here in Minneapolis with George Floyd. We accepted white folks in our community too easy, and those were the ones that were shooting and burning things down. They were taking pictures, they were seen on CNN, and the same folks that were meeting with the Minneapolis NAACP right there on 1201 Broadway, folks that were shooting at black folks and burning the business down. So we have to understand that we can't be too comfortable in accepting the folks who are showing up, because that's how they got in our community. And I feel like we have to learn how to be in more closer proximity to one another. One of the things with a lot of the metro areas is black folks are not as close adjacent to one another as we once were. And we're going to have to come up with a game plan to make sure that we protect one another. And that, I'm not saying go gun crazy, but we should certainly know how to protect ourselves, protect our neighborhoods, and we can't always depend on other groups to protect us. I feel like that's kind of the failure of Black leadership. We've done a lot of helping of a lot of other groups that if they saw us burning on fire, they wouldn't pee on our leg to put the fire out.
Anika, Corey, what are your thoughts?
I agree that we do need to be more unified. A lot of times our community devolves into divisions. There is sometimes division between Black men and Black women. So I think we really need to get on the same page and working together. And also this concept, what does really working together mean? You may not be the one leading it, right? But what is your lane? What is your role? What are your strengths and your strong suit that you can bring to the gunfight, figuratively speaking, hopefully. But, I know for myself, I mean, you're right, Al, about we have not had a real conversation about, what you're going to do when they come for you, right? We've not had that conversation, and we do need to have that conversation. And that goes back to my earlier comment about the complacency. A lot of times people don't feel threatened as long as their paycheck hits that account every 2 weeks, right? As long as the lights are on, and things are functioning smoothly without interruption. That is the beauty and the curse of the American system, right? Like everything functions. People haven't really experienced living in other countries that don't have that infrastructure. I often say, okay, we fight for a revolution, but what happens the day after the revolution? What systems are needed? But we do really need to come together. And to Thomas's point, we've seen this in Minneapolis already after George Floyd. We saw our communities and businesses burning. We looked after each other's businesses. I had friends that would guard watch of our business on the north side. Literally, we were raising funds to feed people and those kinds of things. So, I mean, we've already kind of had a test run of what something like that could look like, but we do need to be more in collaboration. And I've always said this, we need to unify around a common goal and agenda. And we have to appreciate the voices. We may not always agree with each other. We may not even like each other, but we have to be able to put those things aside and meet the moment. Our community has to rise to meet the moment and, be able to. I mean, I don't like guns, but when all that was happening, I went and got licensed to carry.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's like, because I had to deal with the very real fact that they're not thinking twice. They're not thinking about their moral, they're not thinking about God or Jesus. They're thinking about protecting their own supremacy. And we have always made room for other people in our culture, in our causes, in our movements. Other people have built their movements off our movements. And so we have to be willing to show up for each other and for our communities, you know, and being a parent was definitely becoming a parent was definitely a game changer for me. Because your worldview is different. And I think the brother said earlier, you know, no, we don't necessarily support violence, you know, but if you come for me, you know, so I think we're all there, right? But we can't just wait until the gun is in your face. It really does call for a concrete conversation about how to even avoid them getting to close proximity.
So, Corey D, let me ask you, you've led the Minnesota DFL party, the Democratic Party, as executive director. And when you hear this kind of conversation, I'm imagining that you've got your ear to the ground that listens to all 4 or 5 million Minnesotans. You have a broader perspective, not just Black. What are you hearing out there, and what are the fears? And the question I have is, are our friends, liberals, progressives, prepared to stand up for the principles of democracy when they are threatened? Now, here's a scenario. When I was a kid in Kansas City growing up, the enemy was communism. And the training, you get the air raid, get under your desk, hopefully the nuclear bomb would pass you by, that kind of stuff, right? It was really crazy. But as we got older, I heard my white friends in high school say, well, you know what? If the Russians invade here, my life really won't materially change. I'm going to be an accountant. I'm going to be a lawyer. I'm going to be a farmer. And at the end of the day, the only difference in my life in this country is that I might have more language skills, right? And so for ordinary white people, there's this idea that if it changed, so what? I'm still going to be white, still privileged. That's with a foreign adversary. It's closer now. And so what do our progressive, theoretically principled friends say and feel, as far as you can tell, about the possibility of their life changing if the retrograde Trumpites emerge either by the ballot or by the bullet? What'll happen?
Well, I mean, to be completely frank, I mean, I've never been one to believe that kind of our really progressive friends have really been there for Black folks overall. I think it's kind of very seasonal kind of love they have when it comes to it. I think one of the things we've seen is since Obama's election, and then you've seen it when Hillary ran in 2016, is that once folks, certain folks around this country felt that they were being, you know, that we were moving out to their space, the hoods came off, right? I mean, there was a Tea Party all of a sudden, and you have all of a sudden this crazy kind of, you know, right wing kind of populists coming to play in this country. And I think the thing what we really need to see as Black folks, and what always concerns me, Al, and I've said this to you before in past conversations, is that what's happening here, and I only speak to Minnesota right now, is that we're seeing our power base digress. We have less elected officials. We're losing seats all over the state. We barely have any representation in the state house. We barely have it in the city councils. I'm happy with what we've seen happen in St. Paul, which is wonderful. But the reality of it is that, you know, there's a lot of talk that goes on when it comes to any kind of real political power given to African Americans in the state. It's taken away. It's taken away. If you just look at the Twin Cities and what we represent, it's dismal. And Bobby and Stacy, if you guys saw the fact of the amount of power we've lost as people in this state when it comes to electoral power, you would think that we went back to Jim Crow and what kind of representation we have here in the state. So there's things that I think we need to do, and you know, I don't want to just, you know, I think the Civil War talk has been covered pretty good, but what we need to do is make sure that we're engaging ourselves as one. And I couldn't agree with Thomas more on what Anika said, is that we are the most divided community in this state. We have such political power. We have such brilliant minds, great organizations that spew up, but we're very divided. And the one thing we need to do, regardless of Civil War, Trump, or whatever the hell happens, is we have to come together better as a people and realize our electoral power. And so my hope is that as we move forward and we see that the enemy is only getting stronger. I mean, it's not just when it comes to the George Floyd, we haven't just seen kind of this policing thing change. We've seen corporations all of a sudden now see that there's no excuse for DEI anymore. they're like, okay, the clock is running out. We don't need to do it. Okay, we did our part now. So now Targets of the world and the Best Buys of the world are getting rid of these folks. And you're going to see this happen even more and more. You're seeing the whole tech sector support Donald Trump now. We're seeing all these folks who were with Biden 4 years ago, all of a sudden going to the Trump way. And then when it comes to black men, look, I'm a big believer that we have to not just give our vote to one party. And I'm a Democrat. I work for Biden through and through. But the one thing I am happy to see, and I don't want to see us vote for the orange one, as Thomas said, but yeah, work for our vote, work on our issues, and earn it. And I think we have to continue to go down that road, and I hope we do throughout the cycle.
Bobby Henry, what do you think? This discussion local, does that apply, Bobby and Stacy, on the national level? Is there too much division apparent and at work among our people for us to not be as effective as we could be in the national arena? Bobby, what do you think?
Okay, and now I concur. There is some divisiveness within us and our organizations. I witnessed that this past weekend at a Florida Congressional Black Caucus event. And to combat that divisiveness, that division, we have to, and I said this earlier, we have to stand and tell the truth. When there is a blatant lie being broadcast from the podium, we have to address that lie right where it is. We cannot allow it to perpetuate and grow. If we know that what is being said is incorrect, we need to address it. And Corey, I'm gonna direct this to you. You are extremely eloquent about making your position against what we should do. I want you to be on the inside talking while I'm on the outside fighting, because we're gonna need a stall tactic. We're really gonna need that. And we're gonna need everything we can to address this. So yeah, there is a problem within our organizations, within our leadership about us being divided. If we can't understand that this is a matter of life and death, the haves and the have-nots is gone. This is life and death. And if we're not willing to stand and fight and die for this cause, then we are done. So that divisiveness, that thing that keep us separated, it should be the same thing to bring us together, so we can go on and continue to fight for our lives as it is. So I would say, to combat that division, that divisiveness, is for us to have that come to Jesus meeting that you spoke about, Ms. Robbins, but be able to speak about it in its most innate and guttural position, because that is exactly what it is. If we are not able to see the frustrations and feel them in other people, I'm talking about from the hierarchy down, or from the grassroots up, if we can't feel their passion and identify with it, then what use is it for us to even care about one another? We have to be about the business of taking care of the least of them and moving up to the top, Corey. So we're gonna need that at too. So,
Stacy Brown, we got about a minute left. What are some of the other headlines you're looking at nationally, internationally?
Well, naturally, we have the Nigel Cullen situation down in Atlanta, Georgia. Body cam video released there shows simply that police simply assassinated this young man, and a young black man in a mental health crisis who really was no threat. And the video, if the viewers haven't seen it, if you get a chance to see it, just know that it is as triggering as you can possibly think of. I mean, the officers simply unloaded on this defenseless, scared black kid, 22 years old, and just kept shooting. That was the astonishing thing, that they just kept shooting. And so we you know, you mentioned George Floyd. We see so much of that. Still, despite the cameras, despite the reaction to George Floyd, the initial reaction to George Floyd, it's just it's overwhelming. So that's one of the things. Of course, Donald Trump today returned to the Capitol for the first time since January 6th. Should not have been allowed there. In a lot of people's view, but he was there to meet with top Republicans. Just again, they have no shame whatsoever. We can go on and on with that. You said a minute. So, I mean, those, among other things, I've said this on my program real quick, Al, that, Hunter Biden, of course, was convicted. He faces up to 25 years in prison. Trump is probably not going to get prison time, and probably, unless he's not probably, but unless he loses the election, will not be prosecuted for the other cases.
Mhm.
President Biden said he's not going to pardon his son. Well, he better pardon his son. That's all I got to say. No respect for
We're out of time. Thank you so much, Stacy Brown. Thank you, Bobby Henry, chairman of National Newspaper Publishers Association. Thank you, Sister Anika Robbins Foundation, the Anika Foundation. And thank you, Brother Thomas Berry. Thank you, Corey Day. I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.